ReZero Starting Life in Another World Volume 16. Wow, we finally made it to Arc 5 Stars that Engrave History. And speaking of engraving history, this also marks a special milestone in this series. I started this channel roughly around the same time that I finished reading Volume 16, and then I just never read ahead, so as some of you may know, I have never actually finished Arc 5. So from this point in the series onwards, you will not only get the book reviews as I usually do them, but you will also see my true first impressions. I will admit that I have unwillingly spoiled some tiny things in the ReZero wiki by doing research for these videos, but they are mostly tiny details and they are way ahead, so I truly don't know how Arc 5 ends. I think the good guys will win, I just don't know how. And I'll tell you right away that one of the things I'm most curious about is Regulus, how his power actually works and how they manage to defeat it, if they manage to defeat it. This is one of the things I haven't spoiled for myself, so let's see if it pays off. And now let's get right into the usual, starting off with the cover, with the wholesomely evil Romane Conte family. At least for Subaru's sake, I hope this is the full extent of their family. I hope there's no more of these guys, but now that I think about it, a kid between these two would be a sight to see. The ranged offspring aside, it's incredible to me how Betelgeuse has had such great covers and they are all after he's gone. I love the contrast in this cover between this very tender, loving embrace and the fact that the two of them are complete weirdos. From a distance, this cover looks super wholesome. The more you close in and start actually noticing who the characters are in this cover, you'll be quite shocked. Betelgeuse has his usual creepy smile, his eyes look like he hasn't blinked for 3 days, and even his skin is greener for some reason. And then there's this strangely attractive mummy who I also suspect is Emilia's adoptive mummy, Sirius. From the weird incoherent dialogue talking about love or something, to her body being suspiciously covered up and being quite well drawn if you get my drift, to the silver hair, to the relationship with Betelgeuse, this has got to be Fortuna, right? Up until now, the author hasn't really swerved us in that sense. If anything, he's been great at foreshadowing, so with all of these obvious clues, I would actually think it would be dumb if Sirius wasn't Fortuna. I sincerely hope that this is one of the main plot lines in Arc 5 going forward, the revelation that Sirius is in fact Fortuna, Emilia's adoptive mother, would be such a dramatic and chaotic situation, which is exactly what I read ReZero for. And as for the cover itself, it's great, it does its job perfectly. It introduces the character, reveals a little bit about their personality, their relationship, and gets the reader hyped for both this volume and Arc 5 in general. To me, Volume 16 is a moment of tranquility, a nice breather to once again familiarize ourselves with the huge cast of ReZero and set up the things to come. Even the author mentions in the afterword that this is a much needed break after the non-stop action from Arcs 3 and 4. I will say though that this volume is truly important for the reader to decide if he truly likes ReZero, and this may seem like a ridiculous statement, after all this is the 16th volume, but this is the first volume in the series where, besides the last few pages, nothing really happens. After reading volume 16, you will have a good grasp of, do I truly like these characters, or do I just read ReZero to watch the main characters suffer in various diabolical ways? Personally, I really enjoyed this volume. As a standalone book, it's obviously not great, but in the context of ReZero, especially after Arcs 3 and 4, it's very good and, dare I say, necessary. Now, there were things I liked and didn't really like about this volume, so to end this video on a positive note, let's start off with the things I didn't like. The first thing I didn't like is Liliana. Just kidding, sort of. Okay, for real now. The first thing I didn't like was the invasive references to characters or events from side stories. I don't mind when the references are brief and not relevant to the actual main story. For example, way back in volume 4, Liliana was said to have visited the Roswell mansion. This was just a brief comment, it didn't really affect the story in any way, and it was just a nice reminder for the more hardcore fans to go check out the side stories. I like when the side stories are used to complement the main story. For example, in this very volume, the Felt and Anastasia camps are said to have faced the Black Silver Coin, whoever they are. And that's great. It shows that the world is alive, it shows that the characters are dynamic and actually exist in this world and don't simply cease to exist whenever they aren't interacting with the main character. I like it, it's non-intrusive, it fits with the main story, and in case if you're curious, just go read the side story. What I don't like is when characters or events which are relevant to the main story that I'm currently reading are hidden away in side stories. Credit where credit is due, I think they did a good job of reintroducing Liliana as a character to people that, like me, did not read her side story, although I will say it's kind of awkward for me as a main story reader to feel left out when I have already invested my time and effort to read 16 books in this series. It's weird to me that a character I assume will be relevant in the arc to come was introduced in a side story that only a small percentage of readers cared about. And then there's the lolly enthusiast, and no, I'm not talking about Subaru, I'm talking about Clint. This guy is supposedly Subaru's mentor and was relevant in his growth during this 1-year time skip, and yet he's nowhere to be found. He was only seen on this art from volume 15, in which case if you have the physical version of this book, good luck finding him because he's just stuck between the pages. And in this volume's afterword. Really? The afterword? Subaru's mentor doesn't even get a line of dialogue or something? It's weird to me. I guess it's a good marketing tactic to push the readers into reading the side stories. Personally, I don't like it. I don't want to feel like I have to do homework to truly understand the characters in World of ReZero. In my opinion, side stories should be simply complements to expand the world of ReZero and not actually relevant to the main story. And in this specific book, the frustrating part is they could have perfectly introduced Clint. I don't see why they didn't do it. There was a lot of goofing around with Subaru back at the mansion before they go to Pristella, so why not just add Clint to one of those scenes, or maybe just shorten up the goofing around and make an extra scene with Clint or a flashback or something. I don't understand why they didn't add him, but anyway. Another thing I didn't quite like was how Emilia and Subaru's relationship seems to be in the exact same place as it was at the end of Arc 4. From a romantic standpoint, I get it, and it's perfectly understandable as they both have a lot of growing up to do before they get freaky, if you get what I'm saying. But as friends and as knight and candidate, I was expecting after a year to be some sort of more relevant development in their relationship. It was shocking to me right at the beginning of the book where they mention the black snake and Emilia makes a weird face and apparently Subaru doesn't know, so Emilia did not tell Subaru about the context regarding her past and how she faced the black snake. Does Emilia also not know that her adoptive father figure was an archbishop of the witch cult and that he enjoyed biting his own fingers? Okay, maybe that last part isn't super relevant, but the first one sure is. This lack of information sharing is especially egregious to me because at the end of every arc, almost like a meme, Emilia always says, "We're going to have a Sugoku, a really long conversation with Subaru." And what are they talking about? The weather? It baffles me that after one entire year there's still so much information they haven't shared with one another. And maybe I'm just reading way too much into a single line of dialogue, but the fact remains that I was expecting a more relevant development in their relationship. Now, for the things I like, because there were a lot of them in this volume and it makes me really hyped to read Arc 5. The main thing is shifting the focus back into the royal selection. Arc 4 mainly because it was mostly flashbacks and focused exclusively on the Emilia camp felt like a bit of a standstill in the grander scheme of things. Now we are back, the royal selection continues and we get updates on all of the camps. Anastasia is unsurprisingly the new frontrunner. Krush apparently still hasn't quite recovered what she lost by losing her memories. She's now much less competent, which is granted, and both Priscilla and Felt have been making great progress with their unorthodox ways. Priscilla rules as a very competent tyrant, her word is absolute and apparently she just makes all of the right moves, while Felt is very good at spotting talent, especially in people from poor backgrounds who, like her, have potential and a lot to prove. Priscilla and Felt's personalities clash a lot and it's my favorite rivalry in the series besides obviously Julius and Subaru. Felt picking up the Three Stooges is funny and to me unexpected. I thought that the Three Musketeers of Mediocrity were just background characters for Volume 1 and were never going to appear again. Even Subaru is happy to see Larry, you know, the guy who stabbed him back in Volume 1. Subaru's ability to detach from his previous timelines is very useful as it's the only thing that keeps him sane, but at the same time it's very creepy if you really think about it. Yes, it was technically a scenario that never happened, but one would expect that Subaru would still hold some resentment or at the very least be unfriendly towards this guy. This peculiar aspect of Subaru's personality was already noticed by Echidna back in Arc 4, and I'm curious to see how this evolves throughout the story, as the mental toll caused by Subaru's power will eventually reach a breaking point. And that is not the only highlight I have of Subaru in this volume, as I also very much enjoyed the scene where everyone is praising Subaru and he's just super awkward about it. The most notable characters that praised him were Julius, his perceived rival, and Wilhelm, the person that, according to Subaru himself, is the one he respects the most in this world. Subaru does not hold himself in high regard, and this is a mix of various things. He has massive imposter syndrome because his power allows him to know things he should not know about, and he doesn't forget the times that he failed. He also has a massive complex surrounding his fighting ability, which makes him belittle his own feats no matter how amazing they are. Let's not forget this mad lad jumped off of the white whale while way in the air and used himself as bait to catch it. His methods aren't very knightly, but not a lot of people would have done that. And Subaru has been in this world for what, less than 2 years now, so it's not so surprising that perhaps he doesn't have an accurate understanding of how relevant and how important his own feats were. It's such a great contrast to read the story from Subaru's perspective and see how many times he fails and how pathetic he sometimes is, and then compare that to the perspective that other characters have of Subaru, which besides the whole debacle in Volume 4, which still haunts him to this day and people still make fun of him for it, rightfully so, he is seen as a very brave and resourceful individual. After the time skip, we see that the dynamic between some of the characters have changed, and the main one is definitely Beatrice. Before, she seemed to be cold and apathetic, and now she opened up to the other characters, and it's great to see. She's now vibrant and happy while still keeping that edge that makes her Beatrice, I suppose. I will admit that when I started reading the first few chapters of this book, I was a bit worried that Beatrice had been somehow reduced to a cute little comedy character, and those fears were vanquished by a single scene. Near the end of the book, Priscilla is berating Emilia as she usually does, and Beatrice steps in and roasts her back. Not only does she show that she cares for Emilia, who she was quite distant towards before, but she shows that she will stand up for her friends and herself. She's not just a little sister figure to Subaru, she's Beatrice, and she will stand up to those bullies, even if they are big-chested, loudmouthed, arrogant nobles. I love this scene, especially because the members of the Emilia camp are generally speaking a bunch of softies and no one wanted to pick a fight with Priscilla, and then Beatrice steps in like the little tiny gangster that she is. While I don't know where Arc 5 is going or how it's ending, to me the two main storylines and the ones that are the juiciest are number 1, the possible family reunion between Emilia and Fortuna, and the actual Astrea family reunion. The Astrea family drama could make its own reality show, and to me it's by far the juiciest part in this book, and I don't think that's even controversial. We have this awkward tension between Wilhelm and Reinhardt, two beloved characters, and just as things seem to be progressing, here comes this deadbeat, bitter, depressing dad just to ruin everything. Ah, the juicy drama. Ah, so delicious. Because of who Reinhardt is as a character, his challenges must come from personal relationships. You can't really challenge him otherwise without perhaps stripping away his powers or something. Reinhardt as a character is so overpowered and so flawless that it inevitably causes resentment, fear, and envy towards him. We saw how Garfield reacted when he met Reinhardt and he barely knows him. And I'm guessing that his family members also have some sort of complex around him. Add in the whole white whale situation and some behind the scenes chaos that we have barely peeked into, and you have cooked up a very volatile, very hot, very spicy 3-generation hot pot. Heinkel is the perfect foil for Wilhelm and Reinhardt, who are very elegant and classy and knightly in everything they do. Heinkel is vindictive with no class and honestly quite pathetic. Moments after he's been introduced, he's getting beaten up in front of everybody by Priscilla. If anything, Heinkel resembles more Subaru than any of his other family members. I look forward to seeing how this all unfolds, and to me, having such a scumbag in the Astrea family is just a great development. There's still lots of things I could talk about, but let's end with this. I love that Shiryu's power is some sort of psychological manipulation. The final scene reads like a fever dream, or should I say a fever nightmare. It's just crazy. Why is everybody going crazy? Why is everybody clapping? Why does Subaru seem to be affected by this as well? Subaru, who is normally sort of invulnerable to some of the witch's powers. Namely, he could see Betelgeuse's unseen hands after some time and is the only person who can remember Rem somehow. Yet here, he seemed as affected as everybody else. In such a wholesome book, the final scene is very, very dark. This is somehow even more twisted than a lot of bad endings in ReZero, because here everyone seems so happy, just smiling and clapping. It's just disturbing. I look forward to seeing how the gang tackles Shiryu's power, which is psychological and not solved by sheer force. And the worst thing is, Subaru has a very short loop this time, the shortest in the entire series, so I'm guessing that this pain train is going to ride quite a lot. Overall, Volume 16 does its job properly, which is give us a bit of fan service, a bit of a breather after the chaos in Arcs 3 and 4, and set up Arc 5 properly, which contains a lot of characters. Although Arc 5 has a lot of characters, they're all in the same physical location, and I'm hoping it will be less flashback heavy, so I think the story will be less convoluted than it was for Arc 4. By grouping so many characters together, it also gives us the opportunity to see many cool interactions we wouldn't otherwise be seeing, so I'm looking forward to those. And for my MVP of Volume 16, I have to pick Liliana. No, just kidding, obviously not. And now there's going to be some Liliana stan in the comments. Actually, Liliana is the best character in the history of fiction. It's difficult to say what my MVP of Volume 16 is, as it has a lot of characters and not a lot happening. I recognize that I'm usually biased towards villains, but screw it. I'm giving my MVP of Volume 16 to Shiryu for having one of the most disturbing and impactful debuts in the history of ReZero. This is all for me today. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys for Volume 17. Bye bye.